Planet Mission Part 1 by David Claiborne, as read by the author. New chapters every Monday. The full novel is available on Amazon.com and other online retailers. Links in the description. Chapter 22. A Long Walk. Waters' anger churned as the Polus bear took him to the city. "Not the city, let's go back to camp," he said, surprising himself both to be speaking to an animal and that he should do so without a second thought. The Polus bear did not argue, nor did Waters sense that it would, even if it had a different preference. Instead, it practically flew down the hill to the camp. Waters climbed down and paused to say thanks. He wondered why he bothered as he walked away. Waters could not tell if he was truly angry, but he was uncomfortable, and that was enough. It would be appropriate to appear angry in such circumstances after all. He should probably tell his superiors about the incident. He could probably make it appear to be a sign of progress which they struggled to achieve, and with the mayor himself. It could be a long time before the next Li-Fi window opened, so there was time to work on the report. The conversation left him thinking in so many directions that his thoughts were difficult to sort. He decided that he was genuinely a little angry, yes, but not so angry that he should cut off communication. He should not appear too eager to meet again. That would place him at a disadvantage. By waiting, say, a week at least, he could put the mayor back on his heels and gain the upper hand. He had responses for things the mayor had not said, but which the mayor could potentially say. He was grateful he would have time to practice and prepare in advance before he saw the mayor again. He felt grateful for their training, too. Waters ruminated on their conversation the rest of the day. The next day, however, he could not find enough busy work inside the shelter sufficient to excuse himself from stepping outside. He had amended his report already, and there were only so many times that he could check and recheck the regulations and guidelines for conformity. He decided to take a walk, a long walk. Part of him reasoned that no one could question whether he was working and contributing if he were out of sight. By choosing where he walked, he could also avoid an encounter with the mayor or a colonist. That meant avoiding the city and plaza, and the fields and orchards as well. He wanted to avoid seeing Molly again if he could, too. He certainly could not stay at the camp, as that was the first place visitors would stop. So he decided to hike into the hills and mountains. As he departed, he stuffed his phone in his pocket and mumbled something to Junebuck, who was engrossed in his workbench as usual. Junebuck was lucky. It could take weeks for anything to grow. He could justify lengthy amounts of time between progress. Waters still felt he had to be careful, although begrudgingly he was now sure the colonists were right that there was little to fear on Polus. They captured the only APOC in the area, so things were safe. He was still not acclimated to the moon, however, as they liked to remind him. That meant he wore his full envirosuit as he walked for protection against the plant life, tattered and dingy as it had become with daily wear. He also wore the colonists' glasses, their gift to the mission. Although he could blaze trail, that was tiring, difficult work, so he kept to game trails. The flora on Polus was universally and remarkably resilient and difficult, and resisted his efforts terrifically. The colonists, even Molly, seemed to have no trouble moving about as they pleased. This puzzled him. Although it seemed threats surrounded him, Waters was not worried about his safety since he was never completely alone. Within minutes of leaving camp, animals and birds followed him, clustering around him, coming and going, looking at him intently as they walked, hoping for some sign of recognition or a request. He was anthropomorphizing, he reminded himself. Although animals deserved conservation and care, they did not think, not like people. He no longer felt in danger around them. The Polus bears, the colonists' Arcuda, huge and lumbering beasts that they were, and the other animals were ever gentle and careful. While at first they seemed frightening and formidable, now they seemed tame as puppies and strong as elephants. As good for riding as a horse, just like he had seen in old movies. More so since they needed no saddle. They were naturally attentive and would not permit a rider to fall. When they felt pleased, which was often, they made a friendly, chuffing noise and ruffled their fur with color. Molly called it Proustin. She explained it was like a sound tigers used to make on Earth. She had played a recording for them of one of the last tigers making the noise, and she was right. They were remarkably similar. The game trails were astonishingly random. Their jibes and zigs across the fields were generally directional without being straight. The animals tended to put one foot in front of the other and walk in single file, which meant the trails were narrow. It was frustrating to see where the trail headed and know the path did not arrive there directly. He reflected, however, that it did not matter much since his goal was to waste time. After walking in this way for several days, his breathing did improve somewhat, though he still became winded walking on any grade. The composition of the atmosphere was virtually identical to Earth, with fewer emissions, as would be expected since the moon was undeveloped. More interesting was that relative to their altitude, atmospheric pressure was not much lower. It should not have been difficult for the missionaries to breathe, yet it was. It was like hiking 14ers with his dad as a kid all over again. He needed to catch his breath every so often, which was helpful since regular rest periods killed more time. His inability to move about normally and as he would have liked in the environment irritated him, however. He developed a new routine by the third day. He would set out each morning, taking just a few things and not packing food or water. They kept the water purifier, but accepted that the water was pure without pathogens. Aside from taking a tea bag for flavor, he only needed an empty bottle. The vidi were ever present, and both nutritious and satisfying. One fruit sustained him for several hours. In this way, Waters hiked. He stopped and drank directly from the springs that came from the rocks, identifiable by patches of green plants, and when he was hungry, he plucked the vidi. On the 6th day of this routine, 1 day earlier than his plan required, Waters decided it had been long enough. He had considered what he would say to the mayor, and it was time to speak to him again. Waters even looked forward to the opportunity. Where the mayor had not spoken much to Jazzy, he specifically made time for Waters. He needed to be careful, however. This was both his and Jazzy's responsibility in their leadership positions, and he did not want to be perceived as redirecting duties away from her. Although he had not seen her in the previous week, no longer, and he wondered if she would even notice. He had been making himself scarce to be sure, but he should still have seen her from time to time, even if they had not interacted much. She must be busy. He had grown accustomed to the walks and was even beginning to like them. That morning he set out thinking he would only walk a little before going to meet the mayor, maybe even Molly. There was no need, however. For the second time, the mayor approached him first. "Good morning, Alex," the mayor called from the back of a Polus bear. "Are you going for a walk? Do you mind if I join you?" Waters got the impression the mayor not only knew he was out for a walk, but had known he would be out for a walk and had been out for a walk these past several days. Though irritating, it did not matter. He intended to speak to the mayor anyway. Whether he walked to the city or they met not so coincidentally was unimportant. "Sure, I was just coming to see you," Waters said. "Why don't we ride?" the mayor offered. He was not in the mood to share a ride with the mayor. He had no need, though. A pair of the mayor's entourage of Polus bears ambled up and knelt before him, competing for the honor. Waters obliged a beast who chuffed excitedly. The other tossed its head, not disappointed, but happy that its partner had been chosen. "You're anthropomorphizing again," Waters said to himself as he mounted. He had become used to a much slower pace walking on his own. The Polus bears had no compunction about sticking to trails or need to rest or delay from tough, obstinate vegetation, and they made terrific progress. Waters took out his phone to take a picture. The mayor took note. "Do you mind?" Waters asked. It was more of a courtesy than a genuine request for approval, but the mayor nodded. Waters did not permit hours to pass in silence this time and began his prepared conversation straight away. "Mayor, there's something I do not understand. How can you continue to be a religious society in the face of everything we know? Just look at what we can do. We can travel between the stars. We have colonies on distant planets. It was people who accomplished this. We can see into the reaches of space and know the depths and scope of the universe. It is vast, far greater than any god. We can see into the space between atoms and have named the particles and quarks that compose the building blocks of life. Our engines carry us to distant worlds. It is only a matter of time before we have mapped the universe. We can measure the depths of the oceans, the height of the mountains, the distance between the planets and stars. All creatures have come under our dominion, though we learned to treat them well. Indeed, we could fish out Leviathan with a hook, but choose not to. We looked into the depths of the earth and the vastness of the universe, and what did we see there? We saw the infinite, but not the infinite. I do not understand, Mayor, how you can still have faith when we understand the universe and how it works from the tiniest speck to the greatest expanse. And yet, something as simple as a thunderstorm destroyed your camp, the mayor replied. Waters blanched a little at the comment, but continued. We don't need religious explanations anymore. No one looks for krakens because we understand the wind and tides. We don't need Zeus and Thor tossing thunderbolts because we understand electricity. We don't need God to create the world, let alone in 7 days, because we can explain how it was created without God. Even the things we can't explain are vanishing. All we need is time, and we'll know. We don't need God to fill in the gaps. Did you think that God would not follow his own rules? The mayor said. When something can be explained, that's called consistency, not superstition. Did we ever claim that God was an explanation for the unknown? That oceans must be populated with monsters until we know better? We never claimed that God wouldn't tell us how he did something. Our ability to know things about the universe is a feature of creation, not in any way something that disproves God. This was not how Waters had planned for this conversation to go. Why didn't the colonists just listen? If they would only listen, he could make them understand that the administration's way of thinking was right. It's all just rhetoric, he said. If you can explain everything with knowledge alone, the mayor continued, then all things must be within the realm of what can be known, including our own thoughts. How can you trust your own thoughts to be telling you what is true when they themselves must be explained? What you describe assumes that our ability to explain is somehow outside explanation itself, which has never been the case and never will be. When you will not consider God, you eliminate a possibility before you have even asked the question. Waters could hardly keep from rolling his eyes. But I understand. I understand more than you realize, Alex, the mayor continued. Were it not for that one great miracle that settles them all, I could be led away. I'm surprised more people have not attempted to unset it. Perhaps once someone concludes that any miracle is impossible, it becomes easy to dismiss the miracle. What on earth are you talking about? Waters said. You mean what on Polus, don't you? Said the mayor, a twinkle in his eye. This was no time for word games. The mayor did not seem to be taking this as seriously as Waters would have liked. I'm talking about the defeat of death itself, Alex. The one act at the center of time. The resurrection, the mayor said. Now you're just being ridiculous. I have never been more serious. Look, you can keep your zombie Jesus. At this the mayor winced. Waters had scored a point. Something like that is impossible. That you would believe in it makes you ridiculous. Not knowledgeable, not credible, not special. Ridiculous. We know it's impossible. That you continue to believe it says something about your intelligence, I'm sorry to say. This was a conversation that was going nowhere and would go nowhere, thought Waters. There was nothing left to say, and they were making their way back to camp anyway. Waters decided to walk the rest of the way back and dismounted. Thank you for the ride, Mayor, he said, mustering what politeness he could. He turned his back on the mayor and walked back to camp. The Polus bear followed him.